Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
I know what I want to say today. That doesn't mean I know how it's going to come out. For those of you who've known me a little bit, you know that for the most part, the extent to which I think or presume that I have mastery over anything close to scholarship, it's over the ancient texts through the medieval and the modern period, what they meant in their time, and how we're supposed to understand them in their most pure context. And what one does with those verses, or Talmudic texts, or medieval teachings, or Hasidic interpretations, or 20th century sermons, opens it up into innumerable possibilities. Every one of you is smart enough to know that every verse in the Torah, and every line from the Talmud, and every medieval teaching can be harnessed to support or knock down almost any idea in human cognition. It's just the case. Right? People revere the same texts, and they pull things out of it very differently, including, by the way, non-sacred texts. People can revere the Constitution of the United States of America and have wildly different understandings about its interpretation, application in real life. I also know that part of leadership, rabbinic leadership, is giving, at times, my sense of how I think these verses and ideas should be applied to modern circumstances. But I don't claim to have any more expertise about the should than anyone else. I want to study some texts with you, and for the most part, I want us to study them for what they meant when they were being written. But they're also meant, I believe, to stand the test of time and then to be used, understood, and applied by every Jew who lives in every successive generation in a way that he or she thinks makes sense. So we're going to be studying text, but we're also talking about the 21st century, even if we don't get there fully explicitly. And the primary question I want you to be asking yourself as we go through this is, on what were Rashi, whom we're going to study, and Ramban the Nachmanides actually disagreeing about? They're reading the same verse from the opening verses of Parshat Dvarim two very different ways. They didn't know each other personally. Rashi lived 100 or 200 years before Ramban. Ramban knew all of Rashi's commentary and would comment on it, often begin his commentaries by saying, this is what Rashi says and this is why he's wrong. Rashi never got the chance from the grave to defend himself. They are disagreeing, and I want to posit to you they're not just disagreeing about the verse, they're disagreeing about something much larger than that. And I want to see if we can figure out what it might be. What's the verse? It's the verse that makes me the saddest that on this particular Shabbat we did not do the full Torah reading. By the way, that is not a downgrade whatsoever of Scott's beautiful Torah reading. We did a triennial reading. But when you read the entire Parshat Dvarim, you get another musical moment where you have one verse of Torah, not Haftorah, read to Echatrap, because there is a verse of the Torah that begins with the word Echa, which is the same word that begins the book of Echa that we're going to read tonight. And it is in verse 12 of the first chapter of Deuteronomy. And the context is not Jerusalem or destruction, because that's obviously would be anachronistic. Echa just means oy. It means woe is me, or it was so hard. And Moshe is reminiscing about the early burdens of leadership. And he's telling a concentrated version of the story that we read in Parshat Yitro, when they're out of Egypt, and all of a sudden he's got a congregation he's got to deal with. And Yitro, his father-in-law, says to him, if you keep going at this pace, like if you do crazy things like, I don't know, filling up a weekend with meeting after meeting after meeting on a Sunday or a Monday, you're not going to be able to tolerate it. And Moshe is reminiscing about this, and he's telling his people, Eicha Esa Levadi, How am I going to handle this on my own? Interesting, irrelevant to my commentary today, Moshe's memory of this takes some of the wisdom out of Yitro. He's remembering it as if he came to this insight. He said, how am I possibly going to deal with all this? Eicha Esa Levadi. And this verse is sung to Echatrap in the middle of the Torah reading. Eicha Esa Levadi Tarchachem Umasachem Berivchem. How am I going to be able to Esa, carry, burden, tolerate, bear, lift up? Tarchachem. Torach means trouble or burden. Masachem means trouble or burden. Rivchem means you're fighting, you're quarreling. How am I going to deal with your kvetching and how hard it is to be a leader to you and all the things that it's going to take from me and all of your nonstop bickering? And of course, what is the first thing that a classic commentator on the Torah do when the classic commentator sees 3 words that could have been said really in 1 word? Asks what the difference is between the 3. Why did Moshe need to say Tarchachem and Masachem and Rivchem? They're basically synonyms. In other words, classic commentary does not permit like rhetorical flourish, or it understands rhetorical flourish, but there still must be something specific in the redundancy. Right? This is what Rashi says, separating the 3 different things. Tarchachem. In what way were you going to be the load of you? Torach is burden or load. Melamed, this teaches us, Shehayu Yisrael Tarchanim, that they were burdensome people. They were people who are always creating Torach. Tircha is a burden to the congregation. Sometimes you don't sing a prayer as long as you might want to because it's a Tircha de Tzibura. It's going to just be too much for the congregation to handle. You don't let your teaching go on and on and on and on and on when they can smell the cholent already because it's a tircha. And Rashi is saying, like, how am I going to handle the fact that you guys are always tirchas? And in what way were they tirchas? If one of them saw that the person that they were in the middle of a court case with was about to win, Omer Yeshli Edim Lahavi. The guy would say, I actually have more witnesses I can bring to bear. Yeshli Ra'ayot Lahavi. I have more proof to bring. Mosif Ani Alechem Adainim. I got other judges who I think are going to do a better job. It's sort of like gaslighting. You think you're about to accomplish something and get somewhere, and the person that you're in a fight with says, but there's one thing I haven't told you yet. But have you considered this? Endless. Quicksand, running uphill in a Sisyphean way. It is a tircha to be in relationship with people like that. It's a tircha to try to lead people like that. And Rashi says, the Moshe was saying, how could I possibly deal with you? You never stopped. I couldn't accomplish anything. I couldn't get to an answer because when I was about to get to an answer, you would come up with one more way to extend the issue. So if that's what Tarchachem means, what is Masachem? Masachem is from a very interesting root, Nun, Sin, Aleph, which means to carry, to bear, to lift up. It means to bestow, as in Yisa Adonai Panav Elecha, the priestly blessing. The Nun of the root Nasa falls out in some roots, which is why you don't see it in the word Masachem. And what does he say? Melamed Shayu Apikorsim. This says that all the Israelites were Apikorsim. We normally translate Apikorsim as what? Heretic, non-believer, right, scoffer. It really meant in the original Hebrew, it's Greek obviously, it's probably from Epicurus, who was a philosopher and a Stoic. People who scoffed at authority. People who had no tolerance for divine or human authority that comes from God. And Moshe saying that, Rashi is saying, Moshe is saying, you were tons of apikorsim. In what way? Hikdim Moshe letzeit. Let's say Moses was leaving his tent early in the desert. Amru, what would they chatter about him? Right? That was an era where people would chatter about their leaders. Ma ra'a ben Amram letzeit. Why would Ben Amram, they don't even call him by his first name, that son of an Amram, his father's name was Amram, why would that son of Amram be leaving his tent early? Shema eino shafui betoch beito. Maybe things in his domestic situation are not so easy. Maybe he's trying to go out for an early walk because because it's not so easy in the Moses and Sipporah household. Right? Just assuming the worst possible imputations to why Moshe might be leaving his tent early. And Echar, let's say, but if he didn't leave early, he left late, Amru, they would say, Ma Ra'ab ben Amram Shalo, let's say, why is he lingering so long in his tent in this morning? He can't win. Ma Tem Sfarim, they would say to their fellows, what do you think he's doing? Yoshev yu eitz alechem, he's sitting and plotting against you. Eitzot ra'o, negative counsel. V'choshev alechem machashavot, and is thinking bad thoughts of you. So if Moshe left early, they would say about it, he was probably fighting with his wife. If Moshe left late, they said he doesn't want to face us yet because he hasn't figured out all the negative things he wants to do with us, narrowing the possibility with which an authority figure could do anything right. I have no experience of that phenomenon. And according to Rashi, that's why he couldn't tolerate his Mahasev. If they were normal people who treated him fairly, he could tolerate it. But under these circumstances, impossible. And then what's Riv Chem? Turn the page. A Riv is a fight. Malamed Shahu Rognim. The Hebrew word Rogan means to always be fighting, to be in a bad mood, to never allowing peace to settle, to be impossible to contend with. The reason why I have a hard time tolerating your reaves, your fights, because they don't stop. If it was a normal amount, I could respond in a normal way, like a dignified leader. But you're throwing at me a lack of authority, nonstop bickering. As soon as I feel like I'm accomplishing something in moving things forward, you sweep the rug out from underneath me and change the circumstances. In other words, Rashi says that Moshe is saying to them, you're impossible, and you're putting me in an impossible situation. And so what do you expect from anyone in leadership in an impossible situation? Don't judge me for what I'm about to do as if this situation is normal. It's not normal, because you've made it. You, my Israelite people, you've made it completely abnormal. What do you want from me? That's Rashi. 150 years later or so, 200 years later, Ramban Nachmanides from Spain comes along, looks at the exact same verse. And let's look at his commentary. The tam and the reason, the understanding behind Tarchachem, Umasachem verichem, the triplicate of your burdens and your load and your fights. Al derech hapshat. He says something kind of tongue-in-cheek. He's like, we should understand this the simplest way possible, except the thing that he's about to say is not the simplest way possible. But he's sort of saying, this sort of complicated thing I'm about to say, I think this is the simple meaning of the verse. Ramaz Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, hinted lahem to them, Shloshet hadvarim, the three things, she'amar liyitro, that he had said to his father-in-law, again, kind of flipping it around, because in Parshat Yitro, it's Yitro having said it to Moshe, but it's almost like this memory that Moshe was the source of the wisdom there, but that's for another sermon. The three things that he had said to his father-in-law, Shahayahu oseh la'am, that he was doing for the people, because he was a leader. And leaders have obligations, and leaders have duties. And there's three categories of things that Moshe took upon himself to do, to take responsibility for the people. Kemoshe parashti sham, as I, meaning the Ramban, explained there back in Parshat Yitro, the 18th chapter of the book of Exodus. Vehiz kiran liyisrael beremes. And now in this scene in Dvarim, Moshe is mentioning them by means of hints of words. But it's bringing back to what Ramban is saying that Moshe called the three primary things that you do when you are a leader and you have responsibility for a people. Any people. Amar tarchachem. He said the word tarchachem, keneged, with respect to the phrase, V'hodati et chukei ha'elohim v'et toratav. That I had made known the laws of God and the statutes of God, which is a verse from Parshat Yitro. If you go to, did I include it? Yeah, look at source 4. I brought you the verses that Ramban is throwing us back to, which is from Parshat Yitro. When, in verse 15, source 4, Vayomer Moshe lachotno, Moses said to his father-in-law, Ki yavo elai ha'am lidrosh Elohim, when they come to me to seek out God, Ki yeh lahem davar ba'elai, when something comes to them, it comes to me. V'shafati ben ishu ben re'ehu, I make a judgment between one person and between his fellow. And this is the verse he just quoted. V'hodati et chukei Elohim v'torotav, and I try to inform them, instruct them of the laws of God and of God's statutes. Go back to source 3. So we're halfway through that paragraph. Ki torach gadol haya. It was an enormous burden for Moses. Lilamed, to teach. Liotzei Mitzrayim, those who had left Egypt. Hachukim, the laws. V'hatorot, and the statutes. The word Torah in the Torah doesn't mean Torah. It means a statue, like a teaching, like a moreh is a teacher. Uferusham, and their interpretations. Uveuram, and their explications. Vesodam, and these secrets. In other words, it's not easy to impose a new authority and a new structure on those who are recently freed, who are finally liberated from Pharaoh's authority. They don't want rules. They don't want anyone to tell them what to do. And the Torah's rules, I don't know if you noticed, are complicated. Even before the Talmud got to it to expand it, it was complicated stuff. That was a real burden, Ramban is saying Moses is remembering. But that's what I had to do. I was a leader. I had no choice. But yeah, it was hard, but that's what's expected of me. That's why God chose me to take this hard task and deliver to this population something that they didn't really want to hear. But that was my responsibility. V'hizkir masachem, and why did Moses say masachem, again, we translate it as your burden or your load, but he's going to play with the idea that the root nasa, which the nun drops out from that form, can also mean to pray. Keneged lidrosh Elohim. It was against the fact, not against, meaning it was corresponding to the fact that sometimes the people would come lidrosh Elohim, seek out God, which is kind of a biblical way of understanding. They came to have a spiritual experience. They came to inquire of God. They came to pray. They wouldn't have used the word pray, but it's the word that we would use now. And we saw that in the verse when we looked before. Shehu inyan tefillah. This is a matter of prayer, the Ramban says. Shemit palel alehem. That Moses would pray on their behalf. They were miserable to deal with. And they had no idea the distinction between right and wrong. And yet they came, lidrosh Elohim, to seek out some kind of a divine experience. And Moshe felt that my primary responsibility was to pray for them, to allow them to have that experience, to pray for their well-being, even though he was irritated by them, even though the circumstances were hard. V'hu milashon, and this is Ramban bringing another verse in the Bible that shows that the root nasa, masachem, can be related to tefillah. It's from the book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 4, v'nasata tefillah, that you lifted up your prayer. So this notion of lifting up can be prayerful. So what has the Ramban said so far? Two of the responsibilities that a leader for a population has is, number one, to illuminate them and take responsibility for their growth and their learning, even if they don't want to be learning, and to impose a structure and authority upon them, even if they don't want it, and to pray for their well-being and to try to lead them in the right direction. Ve'rivchem. And so therefore, what does your arguments mean, your fighting? Kipshuto, exactly what it looks like it means, he says. Inyanei hamishpatim, regarding the judgment, because when does a leader have to issue a judgment? When there's discord, when there's disagreement, when there's fighting. You don't need a imposition of judgment if everyone agrees how to handle the situation. But you were reaving, fighting, nonstop. And so that placed on me an enormous burden to be offering resolutions and judgments and decisions and solutions. And the reference to that is at the end of the verse that in our parsha, Bamar, and therefore Moses said, Havu lachem anashim chachamim, bring for yourselves wise people, unuvonim v'yeduim, that are understanding and are knowledgeable, al hadayanim bilvad, referring to the high level of jurists that were needed in this generation. Rashi said these three words denote how impossible the circumstances were of Moshe's leadership, and that's why if he did anything that might look like one ought not to have done it, it's because the situation could not have been handled with ease. It was too hard. And Ramban says those three words mean that he assumed leadership, took responsibility for the challenges, prayed for those for whom he was responsible, and understood the endless job of making fine distinctions in order to bring some peace and shalom to what was a very complicated situation. Now I ask you, what are Rashi and Ramban arguing about? If they were in the same room as opposed to being separated by 150 years or 200 years, what would be the nature of their disagreement? It's not just a disagreement about a verse that's too small. They are disagreeing, I contend, with something that is broader and wider. Any thoughts? What are they actually disagreeing about? Bobby.
Not to oversimplify it.
And for Zoomers, I'll repeat what Bobby says.
Not to oversimplify it, but it feels like Rashi is looking at it as an obstacle and as glass half empty, and Rambam is looking at it as opportunity, glass half full.
Good. So Bobby said as Rashi is looking at Moses' experience as an obstacle, glass half empty, oi, this is hard. And Ramban is saying opportunity, oi, this is noble. This is my opportunity to lead. Good. Any other possibilities will be the nature of their disagreement. Come on, folks. Yes. Say more. Neil said the definition of leadership.
Taking on responsibility. The higher up you go, and whatever corporation or government, you're taking on extra responsibility.
So Neil said that they're talking about the nature of responsibility. If I could just extrapolate a bit, Ramban might be saying the more responsibility you take on, by definition, the harder the challenge is going to be, but that's what it means. And Rashi might be giving Moshe a pass a little bit, like, listen, have some Rahmanas on Moshe. This was really hard stuff. Anyone else? One more, Jeff. Go there.
Rashi is living in a sense, the reality of the moment, and Rambam is the wishful aspiration for the future.
Uh-huh.
So the question is where are you living?
So Jeff says that Rashi's living in the reality of the moment. The reality was this could not have been done easily and perfectly, because that's just how hard it was. And Ramban is living aspirationally. Like, Moshe should have risen to the occasion and taken on all the challenges without complaining, without woe is meing him. Rabbi, Daniel?
Rashi is living in the era of the Crusades. He's seen all of his masters get schmeisted, and he's rebuilding. And that's really hard. And it would have been really hard among the population of people for whom, what is the value of all this if they keep killing us? And they be complaining. And Ramban is living at the pinnacle of convivencia in Spain, where people are living comfortably, and there's a certain respect between the authorities of the land and the people of Israel. And the responsibility of leadership is much more internal, much more, what am I bringing, as opposed to how am I rebuilding?
So what Rabbi Daniel is saying is bringing in the historical context that Rashi is living during the era of Crusades, where Jewish leaders and rabbis were being murdered and villages were being torn apart, and the pressures and the costs of leading were so high. And the Ramban is living in Spain during the era of convivencia, like a flourishing of the relationship between the Jews and the Christians, although he also had challenging moments, the disputations where the Talmud was being put on trial, but it might have been more easy for him to have a generous approach to anyone in leadership. Right? So all those are wonderful answers. What speaks to me about what Rashi and Ramban might be arguing about through the prison of Moses, Rashi is helping us realize that it's easy and common and on some level acceptable to say that the problem is external. The reason why this is hard is because it's your fault. The reason why the circumstances are challenging have nothing to do with what's in my control. It's just too hard. And don't expect perfect behavior from me when the landscape, when the battlefield, is as strewn with mines as this one is, intentionally to make it hard for me. Have a reasonable judgment of the ones making those decisions, I hear Rashi saying. It's okay sometimes to say that they are the problem. You are the problem. And Ramban is saying, yeah, but a leader of people at some point has to look inward and say, but I'm the responsible one. And I'm part of the problem. And I took this on. And I have a choice for how I act in every situation. Do I pray for those horrible people's destruction? Or do I pray for their well-being and their own relationship with God? Do I say I've had enough of decisions that other people are going to second guess? Or do I say this is the burden that I have because I'm in this position? It can't always be someone else's fault, even if it is their fault on some level. I think this machloket is very much alive in interpersonal moments, small and medium sized, that all of us have all the time. It feels so good, the endorphin rush of going Rashi here. Well, what do you expect of me in that situation? You were impossible. You made it so hard. You expected me to be a saint in that situation? It feels so good to be able to say that. And it takes a certain amount of nobility and maturity to take a Rambanian view of motion, say, comes down to it, can I live with my actions, with my decisions, my words, my judgments, no matter how hard the context was? And I think this machloket is very much alive in geopolitics. Because it can be true to say that the landscape is set up, curated, orchestrated for our inevitable failure and stumbling. It's set up so that we will look like evildoers. And we can totally identify with Rashi saying, what do you expect, given how hard this is being presented to us? And Ramban might say, you still have responsibilities and obligations on the loftiest level, no matter how many booby traps there are in your way. I would like Jewish leadership and I would like Israeli leadership to contend with both of those simultaneously, without apology, without shame, and with a sense of how powerful both of those thrusts are in society. The circumstances for the Jewish people and the people of Israel to do right now are more impossible than has ever been for any society facing an enemy in human history. I truly believe that. And therefore, when Jewish leaders and Israeli leaders go the Rashi direction, I identify with it. And it has never been more important for Jewish leaders and Israeli leaders to ascend to the level of Rabban and say, no matter how impossible the circumstances has been made for high-level decision-making, it is our duty to contend with that on the highest level possible, so that at the end of the day we can look in the mirror and see goodness, even if no one else will. I hope our leaders are up to the task.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.